Hello. Okay. Well, that's good. I don't know what the difference was. Restarting usually works, I guess. So, React. So I've heard from some students that, and this is kind of well known in the industry, I think, that React is kind of a big deal. People want websites that behave like applications, like that line of static and more dynamic websites has blurred so much now that everybody just assumes the site's going to be interactive somehow. Even like tutorial sites like this would have dynamic components. So there are lots of ways to do that. A big one on the scene is Angular and Angular 2. And they, you know, I'm not as excited about Angular's philosophy. I've never really tried to use it, but what I've seen, it just feels like I don't want to do it that way, just personally. I like a more functional style, and React has that style. Another one is Vue.js, I think, which I've never used. And does anyone know of others that are popular for web apps? Maybe primarily JavaScript-based web apps. Um, JavaScript itself is an interesting phenomenon. It's, I think, understood. It's not a very well-designed language, but for a variety of reasons, the way things become monopolies, companies become monopolies. Likewise, JavaScript became the de facto language. Like there are more platforms that JavaScript runs on than probably any other language. So regardless of what you feel about JavaScript, that's what you want to use if you want to get something out there and available to as many people as possible. So you'll just get used to it. Like maybe you're not going to design JavaScript the way it is from scratch if you were to do it today, but it's got some interesting features. And I think the most interesting thing about JavaScript is because it's actually based on Scheme, which is a kind of Lisp. It is very, very, very flexible. So the effect is that people make these JavaScript libraries that are not fundamentally changing the language. They're literally just libraries, but they do fundamentally change how you interact with the code, like what kind of paradigms you're using, how you're structuring and architecting your code, just the whole design pattern kind of thing. JavaScript is so flexible that you can come up with new paradigms to make your code behave in different kinds of traditional ways. So the C language, for example, C is pretty much C. Like you can kind of make things look a little different, like maybe make it look object oriented a bit, but it's pretty obvious that you're trying to work around how C is designed. Other languages like Rust are a lot more opinionated. They're a lot more strict in how they do things. The JavaScript is like so free form basically that you can just invent things that make the programming experience quite different. So there's a bunch of libraries out there that have really different design patterns to them. And that's why they kind of get this cultish following, because you have so many options. And when you choose one, you really have to get in that mindset and stick with it, because it's so easy to kind of fall out of that paradigm and accidentally start using regular JavaScript or a different paradigm or mixed paradigms. And you just have a mess of code now. So JavaScript's an interesting case of being kind of universally available and so flexible that there's a lot of different paradigms that are still technically called JavaScript. And then you have languages that compile or translate to JavaScript, like TypeScript, and there was a CoffeeScript back in the day. So it makes like it look more like it's maybe Java, like you have types all of a sudden, like strict typing, like you would have in Java or C++. So it's amazing how much has been built on top of JavaScript, whatever your opinions are of the language. And there's only a few ways you actually interact with pure JavaScript language. And with React, one thing you don't do, thankfully, is you don't talk about the DOM. The DOM is the document object model. That's the browser understanding of the page. Like these are the elements, these are the attributes of the elements. Like here's a button, here's a link, here's the source tag of the image, and and this is a child of that, and you got to go find the DOM element by its ID or its class and all that nonsense. That's the real pain of using JavaScript. You get to avoid all that. React takes care of that. And so like I said about React's paradigm, it's more functional in the sense of you're more doing a declarative style, stating how something should look and what its attributes are as far as like it depends on this other value, but you're less often actually describing how to update the page. So the most convenient thing about React is it takes care of the page changes on your behalf. You just describe how components, what they call it, components relate to each other, and it knows which ones have changed based on some data. And it has an algorithm that tries to change as many or as few of those possible on the screen. So it's as efficient as possible. If only certain data has changed and only certain components, like say a list of items, if only that list should change, it's not going to redraw the whole page. So it's efficient that way if you're using it correctly. So we're going to build as quickly as possible. It's more of a demo than a lecture, trying to build an application that exposes a lot of the common parts of React, the things you're going to experience if you try to build your own application. And it's not going to be super pretty or anything, but it will be functional, and I think you would understand how to extend this to something more, whatever it is you're interested in. So for that, I want to do a demo like a shopping cart kind of thing. Actually, not the cart. More like a shopping site where you get to see the products. I don't have any intention of building a cart or buying products, but we can at least do a search and list products and list similar products and show the pictures and the ratings and so forth. We're going to use Bootstrap for the theme because that's just the easiest thing to do. And for the data, one of the main reasons I wanted to do some shopping cart kind of thing was I didn't want to create a blank site, like say a notes application where, okay, now we got to type in fake notes. Let's import a bunch of stuff and then build a site around that data. So for that, we're going to use this data set. So Kaggle is a place, by the way, to find data sets and competitions for data, like competitions for analyzing, machine learning and stuff like that. So for whatever reason, there's a pair of teams that watch Amazon and scrape it. So this scrape has 30,000 records from first or second quarter of 2020. And there's a lot of fields in it, and we'll look at the fields in a second, but takeaway is there's a 60 megabyte TSV file, so like tab separated values that we download, and we have our data. So let's just look at what that is actually. It looks like this, but so here is a product ID, or actually it may just be a unique ID. This is the Amazon ID, so this is just a unique ID. Maybe it's a hash or something. You got a timestamp, I guess, of the crawl. There eventually is going to be what is this? Product, barcode, product, company, type, source, product, brand. Whatever. It's a something. And then I think at about this point is where the product title comes in. And then here's a price. Here's a link to Amazon. And here's the full description of it. And here are images representing the product. Maybe that was the whole title. And then here is, I guess, the whole description or something. Or these might be the tags. There's tags somewhere. And then there's this BSR thing, which says like the rankings. And then here's the rating, average rating. Here are the number of reviews. So enough stuff, especially with that picture, that will help us make it look like a real website. Enough stuff to build basically a search for Amazon products. Not all of them, but 30,000. Now, React is a JavaScript library. So you're going to be making JavaScript code, and there will be a server running called Node, but Node's only really there to let you develop your code. And when you're going to deploy your code, you're just going to give people the HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So this data is not going to be in React. We're not going to actually put this file anywhere in our source code. We have to put this data somewhere else that we can access by JavaScript. So already we actually have this kind of issue of the fact that this JavaScript code is running in the browser, and the user is not going to like download this file ahead of time or anything. So this has to be fetched. Let's say we have a product ID name or product ID. Can we call on something to get the product information? So first thing we need to do is set that up. And what I thought would be simplest for this is just use Solr as, so Solr is a search. Oh, I searched for that at some point. As a search engine, pretty common. Elasticsearch is another one that people use for more like cloud deployments if you have a lot of data. So yeah, Solr is popular, blazing fast, and so forth, open source. So we'll just put every row in Solr and have about 30,000 things in a search index. It's like our database. And then we don't have to deal with the data issue. We'll just ask Solr. So this is, not at all React, but what I've done, I'll show you the code actually. Import products. So I open the CSV file with pandas, get out the elements I want. And all these, you're going to see this later, so I'll just tell you what it is. All these little names have a S or a T or an F. That's a Solr thing. String, text, float, and I for integer. And the technical difference is that string, it's not going to search within this value. The string is just a full thing. You can't search within it. And T, text, it searches within that value. So we're going to let the user search for the name or the description. The only two things with a T. F for rating because it's a decimal value. I for reviews because it's an integer value. And we just turn the pandas data frame into a dictionary, and we throw it into Solr, and it's in there. There are 29,984 things, and all the data is in each thing. And what that allows us to do is queries on either the name or description, or really anything else, but I don't think we have time to support things like searching for prices or whatever. So when you do that, you see they're all related to linens in the name. And there are 285 results with the word linen in the name. So if you say battery, here's 222 battery products. So easy enough. We have our data somewhere. This kind of URL is how we get the items. So we got to put our, well, I don't want to go to that. We got to put our search into there in the queue part. Well, seem to have gone away. Name T battery. So Q equal name T battery, and so forth. So we'll have to like call on this from our JavaScript code, and it will give us back this JSON structure that we can deal with. Now we need a name. You may have seen it before. I think it's funny to imagine a typo of Amazon, so it's going to be called Amazon. And we're going to need a logo. So I've got a logo ready, so don't worry about that. And let's proceed. First thing you want to do is use Node to create a starting website. Create React app. So you have to install Node ahead of time. I don't think anything else really. Can't recall, but it's going to set up React for you. Like a lot of things, JavaScript libraries depend on each other, so there's going to be a lot of extra stuff it's got to install. Now to start it up, it says run yarn start. Now we'll do that in a second. Yarn build is going to make a final version of your whole website with the HTML, the CSS, the images, and the JavaScript. And it's going to compress the JavaScript too. So it's going to eliminate functions you don't use. It's going to make it all like impossible to read by the regular user, but it's also like smaller. It's going to zip it up, gzip. And at that point, you take this pile of files and folders that are like sort of compiled. I mean, I guess you can call it compiled. And you put this somewhere. You put it on S3 from Amazon, or you put it on a static website or whatever. It's just sitting there. It's not functional code in the sense that, I mean, it's functional in the browser, but it's not a server. You don't need a server for this. We need the Solr search to get our data, but otherwise there's no server. So wherever you can put files, even GitHub, you can put this thing on GitHub, and they have public web hosting for free. So you just turn your repository into a website, and GitHub's not going to do any server code. So you'll have to put your search engine somewhere, but this build process makes a bunch of files you just put somewhere with no server. So I guess I want to emphasize that. Then we'll go into the folder and start it like it said to do. It's going to compile. Now, when we're not building the code, it's going to run a version for development it says here it's not optimized. So it'll be slightly slower, but we'll be able to look at stack traces and so forth. So I popped open my browser, and here's their default site. That's just some SVG or something. Let's look at what it made for us. And when you develop, by the way, we will change files, change code. It will automatically refresh itself. So that will be nice. So what it made is, so package has all the JavaScript libraries it needs. Has a public and a source. Public is where you just have static files. You're not really going to mess with these, except index a little bit. And then source is where the code is. It's all JavaScript code. So first, actually, well, let's look at app.js. That's really the interesting one. Well, actually, maybe to get an idea of what's going on, let's look at index first. Index is the page your browser actually accesses. And this is a regular HTML page. It says React app. Let's change that immediately because it's really, without additional work, this is the only place you can set this title. And if you, for some reason in 2021, don't have a browser that does JavaScript, you get this message. But otherwise, it just says, I'm just a div. I have no content. And you don't put any content in this page. And what it loads is, this manifest says what to load. So that's how all the code gets brought in. When we look at index, actually, I guess manifest. Wait. Oh, that's just the images, the icons, and so forth. So I've never actually looked at how this gets translated to. Maybe some stuff gets replaced. Never actually followed that process. Index.js is loaded first. It's going to do some imports, and then ultimately it's going to say render the app, which is in that other file. And where does it go? The div that had the ID root. So we're not going to change this file either, but this is how it gets started up. And so there'll be a moment where it loads the front page. I guess it's too fast, but it is essentially blank until the JavaScript code comes in and gets executed, and then it changes itself to be this page. You can kind of tell that sometimes if you forget to change the title and try to change it only in your code, you'll see the old React app title and then it'll change because the index file gets loaded and then moments later the actual JavaScript does. We're looking at app.js now. There's a function called app and it returns. And so the first thing to notice, if you've only seen like regular JavaScript, is all of a sudden you have HTML inside your JavaScript. This is called JSX, JavaScript with XML. And you're going to mix in HTML with JavaScript. And if you need to refer to things that are variables in JavaScript, you use braces. That pops out to, some variable or something. And otherwise it's just straight HTML. So let's get rid of all this stuff. Actually, this too. And start by saying, we'll just say, so we now have our own page. If you look at the elements, it's just that h2 inside that root. If you look at the source, you see the index source. So this is what got thrown in by Node at the bottom. And this bundle and everything, they'll be the compressed versions when you do the build process. But for development, they're the easy to see versions. Our code might be somewhere in here, but there's a bunch of React code too that we're not going to worry about. I don't know where my code shows up. Maybe it's in main. Yeah, so it may have been the case, I'm guessing here, but this children thing, quote, Amazon, might just be, yeah, here's the H2. So, it's all being compiled behind the scenes, turning the JSX into objects that React is going to keep track of. Okay, so that's our start. You're also going to see in the console, there are warnings and there are errors. So logos defined but never used, that's this thing, because I don't show their logo anymore. Also, notice you're importing app.css, so you can import CSS and JavaScript code. If it's a JavaScript code, you don't have to put the JS. App.css is their initial, blue rotatey thing, so we can get rid of that. All right, now I want to get the styles correct, so let's do the Bootstrap import. What I really want to do is use React Bootstrap. It's going to give me some nice functions, like I'm going to make some cards, and they're going to look like React code, JSX code. So let's bring that in. That is a npm or yarn install this business. So let's do that. I'm going to kill this yarn add actually. So Bootstrap, if you're not familiar, is this library that has all these nice features like cards, buttons, badges, drop downs, forms. They all look nice and so on, colors and everything. So you can change the theme. You can make it look quite a bit different actually, but the elements would still be the same. So we got that, and while I'm here, I'm going to get their icons too. Called React Bootstrap icon, I think. NPM is where the packages are kept. It's always nice to see if it's a package that people actually use. Seems to be okay. So yarn add React Bootstrap. So the icons will let me easily refer to things like, where was it? Oh, here. All these things, which can make your site look like an honest application. All kinds of stuff. Okay, so we added those libraries. Now we have to actually use them. So let's start this up again. And I need to update the index file to bring in Bootstrap. So it says for Bootstrap, you're going to want this thing. And then for React Bootstrap, you're going to want the JavaScript bits. And we should be good then. Oh, and then we import. I'm just going to get rid of app.css. I mean, I could put my own custom stuff there to add on to stuff, but I don't know if I'll need that. So the font changed. So it's a sign that it's probably working. Let's throw an icon in there. Oh, so now I got to import something. I need to import everything, but I'm going to put the label B in front for Bootstrap. So everything will be a B dot something. And then I can say, what's a React Bootstrap example? Components, let's do an alert. Alert. B.alert variant equals primary. And you got to close it. Very particular about closing things because it's JavaScript with XML. So that B alert and everything should use proper Bootstrap format. Yeah, so we're good. And icons. Throw an icon in here. Let's go find an icon. Cloud Hail. When you're looking at the Bootstrap icons, you kind of have to translate in your head. If it says cloud-hail, it's actually capital C, capital H, no dash. And if it's a tag that has no closing tag, you just put slash in the start tag, like that. Cloud Hail is not exported. Did I mistype it? I guess they maybe don't have a Cloud Hail. Cloud Moon. Oh, you know what? I just noticed at the top, they're new, these clouds. So maybe I don't want to use that example. Let's do light bulb. There's a light bulb. So we have icons. What's next? Let's call into the search engine because it's our database. We have nothing if we cannot fetch data from there. So we got to somehow do something like this. Let's make a separate file for this. Solr.js. Let me open up the solution. Okay, so for making your JavaScript code execute these kind of queries against a different server, that's called an AJAX request. Asynchronous Java something something XML. What does that stand for? Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. There's a technique invented, a while back that lets a JavaScript page or JavaScript file in your browser fetch or execute GET and POST requests to other places. And then you have this whole CORS issue, so the browser prevents you from doing that for security reasons, but I've overridden that in Solr. What I like to use on the JavaScript side is Axios, which I've got loaded here. Very popular, 18 million weekly downloads. JavaScript library that can do all these kinds of requests. So let's install it. I don't know why it's not working. Yarn add Axios. So you see the way it's used. You do this, and then you can say like get blah blah blah, and then you do something with the result. Yarn start, and back over here, say that's what they showed. All right, so I'm going to make a function that will get a product by an ID. I'm going to export this function because I want to grab it from the other file. So you can have functions that are private to this file if you just don't say export. If you say export, you're going to import it from a different place. And I'm going to call this get product by ID. I'm going to be provided the ID to get. So I want something like this. So I want to do a search that just says, ID colon and then whatever they give me. It should return one thing, and I'll just return what I get. So we want to return. Now we have a slight issue. You see here, there's these thens and catches and all that sort of stuff. So Axios, like a lot of things you're going to experience in JavaScript, are they're asynchronous, and Node is kind of notorious for this. A lot of stuff in Node, which is what this is running on right now, and the way the browser works too, it does a lot of things asynchronously, which is great for interactivity. You click something, and then it works in the background, and then when it's ready, the page changes, but in the meantime, you can still scroll and everything. So that's all good. You want that for these kind of interfaces. But it makes it trickier to write code because we're not going to be able to say, execute this request to Solr, wait around until it comes back. When it's back, I'm going to return the answer, and everything else should wait until it has that answer. That's not really, it's possible, but it's hard to accomplish. The default is it makes the request, and then it goes back to whatever it was doing. And then at some point, the request is finished. And then, there's this new data, and the page should refresh itself. So we kind of have to be aware of that. And the way that works in JavaScript is typically a then, which you give it a function, you make a function right here. You can also catch errors, and then you can do more thens after that. But usually you just do then and catch. And so it's going to execute this request to Solr. And, it could take a minute or something if Solr's busy. When it's finally got the answer, the then executes, and the answer comes in the argument, and then you do something with it. So let's see how that works. So we'll say, and we want to return the whole thing so that even when we execute this, we can use the then. So we'll say axios.get, and then here's Solr. I actually want to post. And we got to give the query. We got to say ID colon ID. And I guess we'll do a limit. It's going to be one thing, so that's fine. All right, when that gets a result, it executes this, and I'll just print it. And that's always good to have a catch. And at least, print the error. So we're returning the post then, meaning on the other side, first I need to import it. When you're going to name specific functions to import, you put it in braces. And then I want to actually execute that. So I'll say get product by ID. Let's go grab an ID. I'll just leave it like that for the moment. So I'm just like so-called executing the function, right? I have to do the inspect to see the console. So let's just refresh. And here's the console log here. So it did execute Solr, and there was a response, and this is the response. It's a big complicated thing. The data has, so the response dot, the data key inside the response key inside data, the docs key inside response is an array now. So the first element, that's the thing I actually wanted. All this other stuff I don't need to know about. So I guess what I would want to do is do data response docs brackets 0. That's really the element I care about. So I just fetched from Solr. So I basically have a database lookup now if I have the key of the product. So that's good. And the next thing obviously would be to actually show this information on the screen. But notice it did it twice. I executed function once, but it ran it twice. And that is a React development feature. It's going to disable that when you actually do the build process and put it out there to the world. But the idea is it's supposed to be like a functional design pattern. You're not supposed to have too much code that says exactly what order things should happen in. And things should only depend on values, not necessarily on the order things execute. So to enforce that, to basically make you tear your hair out if you're getting errors because you're not doing things correctly according to that pattern, it's going to execute everything twice, meaning it's going to run app twice, which causes this to run twice. So if my code is broken by the fact that this returns twice, I have a problem in my design. In other words, I should not rely on being certain it only runs once. Whether that's a good idea or not, like whether they should make me deal with that or not is a question, I guess. But their design pattern with, it says here, declarative and component based and so forth. The whole idea there is it should not break your app if everything runs twice. So just be aware, we're going to see duplicates a lot of times. So it did the console log thing, but what I really want to do is give back the result. So I'm just going to return the result. And this time I don't see anything. But over here, let's say, I can say const because I'm not going to modify the value. So I'll say product equals get product. So this is what you would normally do in a function, right? You call the function, you get the response. And then I want to print what it is. So notice what it returned. It returned a promise. That's what they call things when they're not completely finished executing. So I returned the post, which had a then, which returned the actual data. By the way, if I don't do the return here, then really nothing happens. So I can't use get product by ID like this because I only get a promise back. It's not a value. It's a value eventually. So by returning something that has a then or something that itself is a promise, I need to do a then myself. So this is actually nothing. So that would be the appropriate usage. Now I'll see it again. All right, so this is the pattern for asynchronous. Anytime you see a then show up, you got to kind of propagate it. So suppose I'm actually going to show in my alert, not my light bulb, but I'm going to show the product name. It's a name T, if you recall. I'll have to put this in squiggles. Okay. Now, obviously, I have a problem because only product is defined inside this function. So let's make a product here, and then we'll set it. I guess I'll call it P up here. And I'll say P equals product. So when the then happens, it finally gets the value from the search. I can print the value on the console, but really I'm setting the value of P, and then down here I'll use P to put the name of the product, because I want to ultimately draw the product information on the screen. So I need to fetch it, and then I need to put it in my HTML. But it says I can't do name T of a null value. And so I'm looking at this and say, well, yeah, it started null. It printed the product, it fetched it. It set this, and watch what we'll do here. Console log P. Let's refresh. I guess I need to, let's take it out of here because I have too many prints. Null, null, okay. So apparently it's still null. If I had done that, it says it's empty, like it never was set, but then if you expand it, oh, I thought it would work. Never mind. But now it's just drawing nothing. So still, the point is, this isn't how things work in React. So we're finally getting to like, how does React actually deal with data? Regardless of the fact that our data is in Solr, if you're doing anything that's going to do a promise, or it's going to compute something and then set a value, you have to orchestrate this in the React style. It's not the normal style. You don't set a variable and then, like in a promise or something, or you go do a computation and then set the value again. Because what happens is React starts this function. It says let P be this, starts this up, which is a synchronous process. So it goes and does its thing. It's off, in a separate thread. Then we're going to print the current value of P, which is still empty. And then we return the alert with an empty thing. And this finally comes back, and sure, it sets P to be something else, but nobody knows that happened. The deal's been done. It's already been drawn on the screen as nothing. So it seems like there's a problem with asynchronous activities. There's a thing called await, but it's all tricky now. The function has to be asynchronous and so forth. So you can't just throw these things in there. The proper approach is to let React keep track of the data, or keep track of the state. So they use the word state for this. You tell React P is going to be a state variable. So P is going to start as empty, and then when the time comes and Solr gives back our answer and P gets updated, I need you to know that, React. I need React to notice that and redraw the screen with the new data. So the only way to tell it about that is you got to escape regular JavaScript functionality. So basically, virtually everything here is just pure JavaScript, except for this JSX business. We're not really using React at all yet. The React part comes in when we say, you keep track of all the things that are used by my my site, all the data that's used by my site. And when any of that data changes, you figure out the things that have to be refreshed. And it won't look like the whole page is refreshing, like you hit refresh on the browser, because it's smarter than that. It'll just update the one thing and anything inside of it that uses that value. So to do that, we don't say let p just be a regular variable. We use what's called a hook. In React documentation, they say hooks, introducing hooks. So we're going to use hooks. And by the way, hooks are relatively new. You used to have to write classes for everything, and I don't want to do it that way. So, because hooks are a lot cleaner. So we're going to use hooks that have these kind of, they have rules to them, actually, the rules of hooks. We're going to have to abide by that. But we're going to use the state and the effect hook because they're the most common, and they're going to be what keeps track of our data. So we'll say const, and then when we say we're going to use the state hook, it's going to give us two things. It's going to give us the original and a function to change the value. And then you say use state, which I'm going to have to import. And you give it the first value. So initially, the product is null. Now, instead of saying p equals product, we're going to call set product to that. And then this would be product. So when React hits this function app, and you say use state, it says to itself, okay, I'm going to have to start keeping track of this thing called product. So anything that uses product, and it knows this uses the variable called product. When anybody sets it, and it could be other parts of code that set the product, as long as you're giving the other parts of code this function, when they set that product, it knows, okay, I better update this. It checks if it actually did change, if the product actually changed. Maybe you set it twice. Actually, it will set it twice, right? I showed you that. It'll run this thing twice. It'll do two Solr queries, the same ones twice. And it will set it twice, but you won't notice because it sees the second time it's the same value. Nothing needs to refresh. That's why it's running everything twice, because I should not rely on the fact it ran the first time. I should only rely on the value. So not whether the state changed, but that the value in the state changed is all I should care about. That's what makes it declarative, or more of a functional style. So let's see what happens when we do it this way. Yeah, I still have a problem because while this is occurring, I'm still trying to do the name of a null because it started null. So let's say if product, in other words, if it's not null, otherwise there's nothing that, it'll be a blank page. So for just a moment, it'll be a blank page. So now we actually have our product name. And if we get rid of all this, oh yeah, actually I've introduced a bad problem. Notice nothing's happening. Oh, I don't want to open that, but it is constantly refreshing itself forever and ever and ever. So, and it can't even close the tab. Because I said the state doesn't change, there is actually trickiness about that when you're returning these squiggle braces or objects. So it runs the query twice, and I suspect when it returns it the second time, it thinks it's different even though the data is the same. Probably. Or, you know, actually, I think the more likely explanation, I think that may be true, but I think what's actually happening here is when product changes, because this function uses product, and I have set product here, by virtue of this variable which is used inside this function, it changing, it reruns the whole function app because it, you know, needs to feed in the new value to the rest of the code. That's why when this prints, after it prints null, it'll print the actual product because the whole function reruns. But that causes this to run again, which causes it to set itself again. And maybe that is related to the fact, or my suspicion, that it thinks it's different. So anyway, point is, we need to make sure this thing only runs once. Because if I get to this application function, I don't need to get to product repeatedly. So that's the other thing we use. Effect. And you see that in documentation here, rules of hooks. There's the state hook and the effect hook. The effect hook, that protects us. It lets us set the state only when we should set the state. I'll make a little function here that has no parameters. And then I'll say all this business. And then in these brackets, empty means only run it once. You'll see other times we put something in there. Yeah, so this time it seems to have behaved. It was null, and when I got the response, the whole function re-executed, which means it printed this one, this version of the variable. And it's not executing more times, even though that did change, because this says don't execute it. Now what we put in here are the things that we depend on. So if I put product in here, when product changes, it'll rerun the effect. So we don't want to do that. That'd be the infinite loop again. All right, so at this point we can actually draw the product because we have all the data. So what that might look like, let's make another file for this. A lot of the same stuff up here. And we'll use a card format. Okay, so we're going to have this thing called props. So what I want to do here is pass in the data I fetched into this function. And so React functions typically call the argument props, properties. I got to import this. So what do we want the product to look like? First, get the product from the properties. That matches this name. And it's going to be null the first time. Actually, it's not because I got an if here. So that's good, but maybe just in case later, you know, just to be sure. So assuming the product is not a null thing, I want to return a card. The card is this thing. It's got the nice border and put an image on top. So we'll say and then, well, actually we have lots of images. They seem to be separated by this vertical bar. So let's just get the first one. Const images equals image s split bar. And then we'll get the first such image. And then the card will have a body. Title will be the name of the product. And, we could put the description, I guess. Can't find module product. Maybe I just need to quit node first. Wow, image must be in Pascal case or Screaming Snake case. I've never heard of that. So line 11, that was a typo. Okay. Doesn't look like much of a card, but let's do, actually this is okay for the moment. Now, I'm going to make a page that shows one product, obviously, but I also want a page that shows a grid of products, like if you're searching or just browsing. So let's go back to Solr, and we got a product by ID, but I want also, like, say based on a search, get products by search. So what's different about this is it's just our query, really. So I guess it's a lot of the same stuff. Let's just take this. And the query will be query, not this ID business. And it's not just docs 0. I'm just going to have to give them all back. And actually, I think I want to be able to not just get the docs, but I want to know the count and everything. So we'll do that. And then let's not, like, this is great for later. What I actually want is get products by search. And then someone type in the chat a search term for products while I'm working here. Which I'll put there. A watch, okay. So I'm changing this naming to be plural using a list. I want to keep track of the number found. Actually, for a proper query, I'm going to need to do it as name t colon or description t colon. So we should get back a bunch of stuff, and I'm just going to get rid of that for the moment. I just want to print it, make sure it works. Unexpected, yeah, refresh. Product is not defined, if product, so now I don't need the if because this starts as an empty list, so it's not going to be ever null. Did it print things? Yeah, we seem to have gotten 10 things. We got 0 things for a while because it was still this, and then the results came back and it all got updated. So here's a bunch of products. Now I want to draw these all on the screen, so instead of null, I'm going to return a bunch of product cards. So I'll say products.map like that. So products being an array has a map function, which you give. So inside the map function, you give the function to execute. And there's the value coming from the array, each product separately, and says, okay, what do I do with that? What do I return? Return the product card with product equal to P. And what doesn't like? Sometimes there's issues with the fact that you didn't really properly start your JSX. So you can do these empty tags to start the JSX. So we have products. The images are by default stretching. That's why it's all massive. It's a watch battery. It's a watch box. So it would be nice to have these in a grid that we can do with React Stack Grid. And to use that, just a second, that looks like so you don't need the squiggle braces when you import if the file has said what a default import is going to, or default export's going to be. And that's what they've done with StackGrid. And yeah, I think that's what we do. Why did it give 10? Let's change the limit. See how the page just suddenly is different. Now, it's okay, but let's try product card. Actually, we do it here, column width. So we're setting properties to that component. By the way, this thing that we've made is a component. StackGrid is a component. This will be set in its properties for that component. So that helps. These descriptions I don't want in the card like that. Okay, that's a little better. It's all quite large actually, but I have it zoomed in. Okay. Good. Now it's got the animation. Let's take that off. 0 millisecond animation. Boom. And there's a possibility, I don't exactly see it right here, of the images getting too large or just overflowing their card. So it has an additional feature called monitor images loaded. When you do something as a property that's just a straight word, no equals, it just becomes a true. So in this case, it will properly reorganize the grid when the images come in because they're being loaded from Amazon. So they come all at different speeds. So there's our grid. Now I've got ratings and so forth. So let's add that. It's over here. And rather than put a bunch of junk inside this product card, let's make a separate thing, because when I actually draw the product separately on its own page, I want to use the same functionality to show the ratings and so forth. So I'll make a separate component for that. Now the rating, it's interesting. I want to use the stars of the icon stars. They're somewhere. Yeah. So I want it filled in. If your rating's 4.2, I want 4 of them filled in and then a half for the fifth. If it's 3.2, I want 3 of them filled in, then a half, and then a blank. And just believe me that the functionality is as follows. Yeah, so product rating, it's not exported. I don't need other code to use this. It's only within this file. And I get the product from the properties. I get the rating from the product. If there is a rating, because some don't have ratings. I need to know how many, I need to make a list of stars, which ultimately I'll put in just a div. So I'm going to make an array. And then I push things into the array. What I'm pushing is little HTML bits, which is just an icon actually. So I find the floor of the rating. So if it's 3.2, that'd be 3. I do that many stars. I find out if there's a 0.2 or whatever left over. I do one more if there is as a half star. And whatever is left until 5. So now I've gotten up to 4 stars being drawn because I keeps increasing. If there's anything left to go to 5, I do empty stars. And then ultimately I put them in a div and then a break. And then I do the count of reviews, integer, which says like 5 or something. Then the word review. And then I always like to be sure to have it be reviews or whatever plural if it's anything but the number 1. If it's a number 1, it should just say review. So if, here's a little ternary operator. If P reviews I is the same as 1, just put nothing, otherwise put an S. This triple equals is important in JavaScript because a lot of things will be converted behind your back. A lot of things are equal to each other with the 2 equal signs. So you want to use triple virtually everywhere. And if you don't use triple, it'll actually give you a warning. React will. Because it's using a tool called a linter. Linting is a method of checking code to see if it follows certain rules. So it's going to tell you use triple equals here everywhere. That will ensure when it looks, if this is equal to this, it's not going to convert anything. This would have to be exactly a number 1 integer. If this were like quote 1, I think it might convert to equal 1 if you just use 2 equal signs. And many other cases that have weird situations where 2 things are equal to each other if you just use 2 equal signs, and you don't want any of that business. So always use triple. Yeah, so somebody asked, what does let mean in JS? So let is used if you're going to change that value, const if you're not. I guess it's just an efficiency thing. Now, this array is changing, but technically the object is not changing. Like think of it like a pointer. It's not changing, even though I'm adding stuff to it. So I get away with const. But other things like a simple integer, you have to use let. Let's bring this in. Say product rating. And then here's a neat trick. Notice this props uses the product in the props. This props uses the product in the props also. So I'm just going to pass the same thing. I'm going to say product equals P. So why not just pass all the props? Whatever props this component was given, send the props to the child component. And ... inside braces means make copies of all the keys and values. There's our ratings. Notice I had to refresh to make this redraw correctly, so I'm not so sure about the stack grid library if it's sufficiently responsive, but whatever. So that looks pretty cool. Let's put the price in there real fast. And likewise, price is pretty straightforward. It's just a bit of conditions. If there's a price and it's greater than 0, in other words, it's not a nan, it's not a number. Put a nice bold $sign and put the price. So then I'll do price and price. I guess I could just do the props thing again, but so we're going to feed in the price. There's our prices. There's no ratings or price for this product for some reason. That's okay. It's just how it is in the database. So we have prices. These things are kind of stacked on each other too tightly. Let's fix that. Actually, I don't want to do it here. I want to do it here. So there's a bunch of classes in Bootstrap that are for like spacing. And I want to put a size 1. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Size 1 margin around every card. So now there's some space. And we get some really long images, which can be annoying. So what you got to do for that is set a style. This is how you set a style in JSX. CSS style. So that should take care of, it should keep the aspect ratio, but also shrink the images so they're not outrageously large. Well, maybe that didn't keep the aspect ratio. I thought I had found a solution for that, but I don't know. This doesn't look right, but maybe it never looked right. The others look okay, I think. I'm not super sure, actually. Anyway, that's all we're going to do there. So now I want to be able to click one of these things and go to the product page that shows like the full description and everything. So I'm going to need a link. I'm going to link the image. And then I'm going to decide where it goes by saying, maybe I'll support /product. With an ID following that. There's a link. Now you notice if I click one of these, it goes here. And you notice nothing actually happened. No matter what I click. Oh, look, this looks correct now. I should be centered, so let's center that. Not centered. So we got to deal with different addresses. Since we're doing everything with as a React app, it's seeing that and basically ignoring it. Everything goes to the main page. So I have to add routing, and there is a node library called React Router. So let's do that. And React Router will, so actually something I should have said a long time ago. Now I've never tried this. I know some students have tried this. There's a different form of React called React Native for mobile apps, Android and iOS, and looks a lot the same. Certainly all the paradigms are the same, or the design patterns. So if you learn React for websites, you're going to have pretty easy experience with React for mobile. And that's fantastic because then you can kind of just know one thing. But I've not tried this myself. If any students have tried it or whoever's on watching, you might say in the chat if it was easy or whatever, but something to look at sometime. So that's why I have to say DOM, because they have a React router for native, which is what happens, like it handles the cases of when you touch something and a different screen comes on, right? How does that all work? You can use React router for that purpose. So for DOM, that means it's going to handle browser links. So back over here, it's really in the app, kind of the top level thing where I want to deal with this. So we're going to import browser router as router. We're going to have a switch and a route. Okay, what we need to do is not execute this if it's supposed to be a single product. So I need essentially an if, and that would look like router. So set up, so at this point we're going to activate the router, and then we're going to say switch, because we're going to have different situations. Main situation is if you're talking about the root, and we're going to tell it what function or which component to draw for that. And so I'm going to move the stack grid business into a separate file. I'll deal with that in a second. Now that root's actually the most general, so let's put it last. If you're going to product with an ID after it, let's grab the ID and run a certain component, which I'll call that. So back over in that product source file, I'm going to have to rename this to be product. Actually, that's good. I'm going to make a different version of this. That's going to be product page. Right now, it'll just be the same, but product page. And close the switch, close the router. Now, this business of fetching the products by search, I want to do in these other files instead. So I'm going to grab this stack grid, this. That's all going to be here. This won't get product by ID. Actually, this is the all page. This will get product by ID. Function. This would be called product grid all. And down here, take that. That is the function that grabs the products, which means I'm going to have to move the state variables. I lost my effect, so let's put the effect back. And this I will take, give to the product page. Going to need state variables. It's not from the properties anymore. It is just a variable. It's called product now. So our app now is actually quite trivial. It just says go here or go there. And in the case of going to the product page, we're going to have to get that ID from the address. So what we have to do there is when you're using the router like that, you can get the parameters by saying props.match.params, and then whatever you called it here. Oh, this is the wrong function. Here. And so product ID will be this instead of that specific one. So the product ID will come from the route by putting the product page as the component for the route. It'll pass in these properties, which you can fetch the product ID, and then we'll set the product to be null for the moment, and then we'll go fetch it. And if we get it, we set it to be the real thing. And if we do have it, we'll draw it. And in the other case, if we're doing the home page, product grid all, I'll have to import all these things. Calls this set count products to blank, do the search. Now we still have the word watch in there, but that's okay. And then do stack grid, and it's going to call on product card, which is defined in this other file. Yeah, so lots of changes. Let's just restart. All right, we have some sort of problem. Okay, before we figure out the next problem, this find DOM node thing is because the grid functionality is slightly out of date in the way they're doing things. Actually, because it uses size me, which is out of date. And so there's a idea of strict where you're not supposed to interact with the DOM at all. So we'll ignore that. It's not our code. Likewise, not our code, not our code. This is our code. It says everything in a list should have a unique key. That is from this map function. So it can't really tell if something in the list changes, which of these product cards has to update. So we have to give it a key. You have to give a key that's different for every one of them, so we'll just use the ID. So that helps it only update the things that have actually changed. That should fix that. Okay. Here's stuff we've imported but never used. Okay, we can deal with that later. Use effect has missing dependency product ID. So in line 44, we have this use effect. And since we're grabbing from Solr with that product ID, we want to say that this effect, it's not that it only runs once. It's really run this effect every time this ID changes. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, if it's coming from here, but that's the idea. That's what it's complaining about. It says, hey, I've noticed you use product ID inside this effect, but you didn't say depends on it. So we're not going to run this effect when product ID changes, and that seems wrong because you're using the value. So you put the things you depend on in this list. And if you depend on nothing because you want it to run only once ever, you use an empty list. So that would fix that problem. And then all these, the rest of them we did not do. It's from libraries we're using. And we're just not using all the things we import, but that's okay. So now if I click one of these, I have some sort of problem. Cannot read rating F of undefined. Yeah, so probably what happened is it's on product page, if product, so if it's not null, so it's been set. It comes from line 8, product rating. So it doesn't find rating F inside of P, and P comes from the props. P is the product, which comes from the props. So somehow I'm not setting in the product, but I said if product, so that's interesting. Oh, notice. Yeah, so now it's not good that I did this because it's sending the original properties, which product was not defined in the original properties. So let's just actually send in the product. So here is our product page. Make sure there are no errors. All right, here's our product page. We don't really need a card anymore, but whatever. And I'll put the description in this case. So here's the one page with that product. A cool thing to have would be similar products. What we can do, there's two ways to do this. One is called, what do they call it? Content recommendations. And the other is called collaborative. So collaborative is where you keep track of what people do. They click something or buy something, and you have their ID, like which user is this? And so you know this user has clicked or bought all these things, or like on Spotify or something, they've listened to all these songs. And you keep records of that, how many times they listen to each song. Then when there's another person who's listened to some stuff too, you can say, well, how similar are these two people? And if they're quite similar, then what person A listened to should be recommended to person B because person B likes a lot of the same stuff that person A likes. So that's collaborative. You have to keep track of all the different people and what they're doing. Now, we don't have any users on this application, and I don't really feel like making this whole user concept. And besides, with collaborative, you really got to kind of click a lot of stuff before you start to see it take an effect. The other one, content-based, is where you can look at the words that are used to describe the products in the name and the description part and find other products with similar words, either the same words or some sort of overlap. And how that's all done is described in my book. If you want to copy this PDF, just email me. I'll send you a copy of the PDF. And there's a chapter 4, Blueprint for Recommending Products and Services. So it describes the content-based recommendations, which is the one we're going to do. And basically, you take all the words of all the different items, all the different products. You do these distance calculations. You do weighting to make sure common words like the don't make two things similar to each other, but rare words like battery do make things similar to each other. Use Facebook's FAISS machine learning library. Uses the GPU to find a compact mathematical statistical representation of how similar everything is to each other. There's also a Python library called implicit that we use. And then you do a decomposition process to kind of collapse all the data of all the different distinct items into a more efficient representation that only keeps the most important statistics so that you can easily see which things are similar to each other. And anyway, it's all explained here. And then collaborative is explained as well. So if you want to have that explanation, just email me for the PDF. But the takeaway is the code from the chapter is public, and there's a chapter 4 folder and Amazon title similarity. And here it all is. This just runs an example or two. So I've made some slight changes to have it run as a web service using Flask. So anyway, the way we're going to use it is we're going to execute the similar request, and it's going to take in the product ID and how many I want, and it's going to give me back product IDs that are similar. So let's use that to get similar products. Make a function called similar. Back to Axios. There's really no point typing all that. Just copy it here. Here's the thing running, /similar, feed it the product ID and the count I want, how many similar I want, and it gives me back similar product IDs. So that's good. But I need to use it now. This can be a little tricky. So it's only going to appear on the product page, which would be this. All right, now I want to, after I get the product actually, I then want to do a similar check. So whenever the product changes, and it changes in a good way, it's not null, I'm going to do, this might be necessary, I'm not sure. Let's make sure there's an actual ID. So I'm going to say get similar products, product ID, say 15 of them. Now notice, this is the same thing we had at the beginning. It's returning a then, so I have to do a then likewise. We'll say results. And, you know, for right now, we'll just see what it looks like. So, does it run? Get similar product not defined, because I did not import it. There's 15 product IDs, and the distance is the similarity. So I guess there's, just seem like small values, but we'll see what the actual products are to see if it worked. But notice I'm getting product IDs. I want to actually fetch the product because I want to draw that card again. So I need to go and fetch each of these that get returned. It's an array, so you'll say, you know, for sim of results, goes through each element, and then get product ID or by ID. Because there's two parts, product ID and distance. I'm just going to ignore distance actually. That's a promise, and so I have to do it then. Here's the product. Well, I don't want to confuse the other product, so product. And then I'm going to keep track of these things. So I'm going to push it. Which means here, I'll set this up. And then when the for loop is done, I'm going to make sure that worked. This is what kind of Node in JavaScript gets criticized for. It's all these nested functions, nested promises. So things get kind of tricky. I'm not even doing any like file access, so loading files and all that have the same behavior. and it's an empty list. And then when you expand it, it's full. So watch that again. It's empty, and then, oh, now it's full. So what's happened there? I mean, it would not draw it as empty if it didn't think it was empty at first. So it actually printed this, and then in the browser, when I expanded it, it then filled out the details, because technically when it printed this, it's the same object. Even though it's an array, it's an object. It was an empty array, and by the time I'm clicking expand, the array, the same object has now been filled. So this doesn't redraw in the right way, but when I expand it, it's all there. So I have a problem with, I mean, same thing as always. Anytime you're doing this asynchronous stuff, it's going to run this line of code, start the for loop, start that in the background, go on to the next in the for loop, the next in the for loop, go through all the things in the for loop, come out of the for loop. All these are running in the background. Go on to this line of code, which this thing's still empty, and then it's done and it proceeds with life, and nothing would show up. I'd have no similar products on my screen, even though eventually this thing does get filled up. So I have to kind of make sure that this array, like, it doesn't proceed past this point until everything has been filled in. And I'm going to need to actually keep track of the similar products. So, okay, console print's fine, but what I really want to do is set similar. And I'm going to use it below to actually draw the similar products. So I have to do some craziness here. I have to say, well, there could have been an error, so let's do if results. And then we're going to say, we're going to make sure this for loop pauses every time it hits this and doesn't proceed in the for loop until every one of these is, like, it's going to start one of them and then wait for it to finish and then go to the next item in the for loop. So that will kind of ensure it does not get down here until everything's been filled in. But, you know, to do that, I have to use the word await. That pauses and doesn't run the next line of code until this promise has finished. But you can't put in await unless you declare your function asynchronous. So I have to make a little function right here that's labeled asynchronous, has no parameters, and just runs this. So I've made the function. Now I need to execute the function. And then itself, being asynchronous, turns into a promise, so it's not going to do anything again until I say then. And I'm not returning anything, so there's no, like, response or anything. So I'll just make a function with no arguments. Then you get to do these two things. Yeah, so that's what it takes. All this to make sure one line happens after another in time. It's so designed for asynchronous operations that if you want synchronous operations, you got to go through all this to make that happen. So now, notice the first time it prints, it has all the things. So that seemed to work. Now let's actually draw the similar products in a stack grid like before. And at this point, I want to make a little bit of design choices. Put these in separate rows. This is the product page, right? Yeah, I don't need the card for a product page. I don't need a link to itself either. I just need, on the left side, with some margin, the image. It'd be nice to put all the images in a carousel, which, by the way, is supported. But it takes a very small amount of code, but still. Let's be quick here. Style. Okay, and then this will be an H2. So bold font, paragraph. I want to link to the original Amazon page. Open a new tab when you do it. Show shopping cart as an icon. Have to adjust the padding because icons are often too low. Okay, so there's that. And then the product rating and the price. I guess I'll leave it the same order. And this closes column, closes row. Let's just see what that looks like first. Yeah, so it's nicer, I think. Put a little spacing above this part. We're going to say the center, that's similar products, and use our stack grid. And similar is a list once it gets set. So we map the list, go through each thing in the list, and make a product card out of it as if it were on the front page. So reusing code. May not have imported stack grid, so I got to do that. Similar products. These are similar by words. They appear to be batteries. Back to the front page. So it's coin purse. This is with no search. Or is a watch search? I don't know why this. Oh, it's got the word watch. That, what's similar to that? Probably because of the word face. There's some other things about faces. And then an actual watch. More watches, mostly. And this bear. Flowers. So, you know, people criticize Amazon's similarity, you know, recommendations like, oh, you bought a lawnmower. Do you want a second one? Well, here's an example of worse similarities. So you could do better. They're doing better. But we're only looking at the words. So we're not even looking at what people buy. That would be collaborative filtering. So there's a question in the chat about, that's a good question, about things like, where's an example? Like these being capitalized a certain way. Also in the styles, like here. Oh, that's a typo actually. But the format camel case, that's actually quite specific. React is detecting that and it's keeping track of the class and whatever. These are like properties to the H2 tag. If you just say class, it complains actually. And then in style, these are CSS attributes, but again, it's like it knows what CSS attributes can be, what the valid ones are. And so it checks that you're doing valid ones. And because in JavaScript this look like a minus sign, you have to write it like that. So fix that issue there. So that's good. Fitness tracker, it's fitness stuff. Anyway, seems to be more or less working. And then the last thing we need is, oh, actually, so one last thing about the style business here. This outside pair of braces is just what you do when you set a property to something that's not quoted, or, you know, an object or whatever. And so that starts the property value. And then inside, what you're setting it to is a dictionary or object. So that's why you have double. Okay, so we need a search bar at the top. That would be on the app side, I would say, because it's on every page. And after we do this, I think it's enough. So let's see how fast we can do this. Let's do a proper bootstrap thing. That change anything? Yeah, made a little border padding. And then we would want actually I got to put inside here for a reason you'll see. Oh, finally I get to introduce my logo. I forgot all about it. It'll link back to the front page. And that's a little short column, and then I'll do another column with a big search box. It's going to be a normal GET request. It's going to go to the search action. And here's how you do a form in Bootstrap. Actually, React Bootstrap. Large box for typing. I'll set a default value in a second. Boom. There's my logo. And that box is a little tall or a little high, so we'll do padding on the top, size 5. So these are things I've searched before. So if you go to a page, you can go back to the front page. All right, so I want whatever we type here to be instead of watch. Let the user type it. Now, if I just put something here, notice it's going to go to this address. So I got to handle that. That's in my route. So I'll go deal with that in the grid code. And spare you, well, yeah, let's spare you the details. So what I've done is set up the products to be null because I'm going to do a search on them. page count is in the solution I have the, page 1, page 2, page 3 kind of thing. So that's what that is. And page number also. Now the params is where we grab what they've typed in the query. So we have to look at the location and the thing called search, which is what the browser establishes. It has nothing really to do with the word search. It just is whatever question mark is. This is ignore the question mark, and they're going to come back as param, so we'll finally get the query parameter. The QS is a library that I need to import. QS is here. Its purpose is query string parsing, which is our current situation. And I have some things not defined, so let's see. So parse works, gets the start. If it's not defined, start is 0. Use effects, search products. So I've called this differently in this code. This is called get products by search. And I've only defined it to take the one parameter. And it sets products here. Product grid doesn't take these extra parameters. Right, what does it take? Oh, product grid all is what we call it. Product grid search is not defined. That's probably an app. Product grid search. Let's check. I just need to quit, come back. What should we search for? Headphones. Oh, misspelled it. Yeah, so notice it doesn't care because we put the word watch up here. So we got to feed in the query. Wait, what am I doing? This is the wrong place. What I want to do here is just get all results. What I meant to change, products by search. I think I need to say name T. Description T. Okay, so here's all products. Why didn't that work? So let's check that we got the right query. Headphones. Okay. Should have passed in the query, get products by search. Let's make sure it actually did do that. Query. Sent in headphones response. Oh, these do mention headphones, I guess. Let's make it not in the description. That seems to be a problem. How do these mention headphones? Let's try batteries. No, something's wrong. Get products by search, set products results docs, product grid all. Oh, product grid all is just replacing the search. So we do need to move this. It's just doing its own search. This is the grid business. So we'll extract that code. And we just say cons products equals prop step products. And if, because it could be null at first. All right. Batteries, hair gel. Similar to that, more hair. Not many headphones. It's a weird data set, but whatever. We'll try light bulb. They have one light bulb, apparently. Oh, this says light space bulb, so I can make my query system better, obviously, but so there you go. The last thing I'll show you, I'm not going to type it out, I'll just show you what works. And I'll put this code online, obviously. I close that one. So the only other thing I did in the original code was add the page numbers. So here's your products, similar, batteries. You see these page numbers, which is obviously somewhat essential. So it's not a bunch of work, but it's not very exciting either. So the takeaway, I'll give, I'll upload the YouTube or upload the video to YouTube and give everyone a link to that in the department, but I'll also give you a link to the code behind the system. And I guess what I wanted to mention this, I wasn't going to show it in code, but this is very useful if you want to do charts, plots. I would use Victory because it's built for React. It does all the usual stuff, and they can be animated, interactive, and it's got a nice examples that you can change live. So I've used that a lot, and otherwise, I think I showed you most of the things that are common. Yeah. So, so the takeaway is, I've shown you the component and hook-based version. There's a class-based version, but I think that's kind of going out of style. So all the use state, use effect is the hooks style. So just be aware if you're looking at docs and you see like even their own documentation, you got these classes that extend React component. I think you can get away without doing any of that these days. When you do it that way, you have to keep track of state with this pointer, and you have to call your parent constructor and all this jazz that it's not as fun as just using hooks. And I think for pretty much any situation you're going to be in, it's smart to use React Bootstrap to get a lot of the hard HTML out of the way, because it has all kinds of, I guess I should have used this. I built this again from scratch, but should have used that, but it's got accordions, which are things like this. These nav bars that you're used to that go on the top of the screen, like up here, and progress bars and so forth. So use Bootstrap, and I guess that's it. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of NPM modules that I've only used a couple, so there's a lot more out there than I know about. What I didn't show but would be nice sometime to talk about is how you deploy these things, and you can do it for free on Amazon, for example. If you use S3 and the free tier, it'd be totally sufficient. So you can have literally your site on a .com and be super fast to load, and then you just have to figure out where your data is. So if you do take a class like cloud computing, we'll talk about that. Your data can be also in Amazon, and all in the free tier. Actually, you can have a whole functional site that's very fast and efficient, all for free. So any questions in the chat? Otherwise, we'll take off. Thanks, Dr. Plant. Yeah, it's advanced, but I wanted to get a lot accomplished so that you can review the video if you want or look at the code. But at least we have something that is kind of interesting to look at instead of going, baby steps. But obviously, this is probably really fast if people are trying to internalize it all. All right. Thanks everyone for your comments, and I'll send an email when the video is ready.